We are about plans, and thank you, Art, for stressing how important a struggle this is, how big a struggle this is that we're up against, but also how people can come together, and there are strategies out there that we can learn from. There are strategies that Aaron and others mentioned that are already underway, and we can make a move on this Line 9 issue and on the tar sands in general. Art spoke about personalizing the struggle, and I think that there's nothing more personal for others like me that live in Toronto and have Line 9 running across the top end of Toronto, where if there was a spill, as we talked about earlier, it could be polluting to a lot greater detriment than conventional oil. Places like the Rouge River and other watersheds that are feeding down that are going to affect our water supply and our health and well-being. So while we're going to say no to Line 9, I think this is also about saying yes to so many other things, and we said that earlier today. We can talk about Line 9 and that we're against it in the same breath as talking about being for renewable resources, renewable energy sources, conservation of energy, and getting off of this oil dependency that we're enslaved to at the moment.
Anti-nuclear.
And anti-nuclear. Yeah. That's what this yellow patch is for. So I think we'll wrap it up, and we should have some time for questions after Maude Barlow speaks. Now, Maude is the National Chairperson for the Council of Canadians, as you may know. She chairs the board of the Washington-based Food and Water Watch, and I'm glad to have her here. She will get right to it. I'm glad to have her here because I'm a member of the Toronto chapter of the Council of Canadians, so thank you.
All very, very much. Thank you to all of the organizers. Thank you to everybody for being out on this beautiful fall day. It's an honor to be with Vanessa, Wes, Art, and Aaron up here. This has just been a very powerful couple of hours, and I'm just thrilled to be part of it. I've just returned from Mexico. I had the honor of being on a People's Tribunal on dams and evictions, and spent a couple of days in a town, a very beautiful town near Guadalajara, that is going to be drowned by a dam with two others if we don't stop it within a year. And then I had the honor of going to another community where they're fighting Canadian mines. As we all know, Canadian mines are the worst in the world. And I came home feeling very strongly that we're all fighting the same thing. I mean, the same agenda. I was on a panel with one person, an anti-mining activist in Mexico, saying, well, these mines don't act like this in Canada, and these energy companies, they do bad things around the world. And I said, update. Update. Our heads of state and their corporate friends have formed a kind of global loyalty, and they have more in common with each other than their people, and we have to form a people's movement around the world to fight what these people are doing and what these corporations are doing, and what our governments are allowing them to do in our name. So it just struck me very strongly that the kind of presentations we just heard, people are living here exactly under the same kind of threats as the people I spent time with over the last week. Just want to say just a little bit of background information about the tar sands. Currently they're producing almost 2 million barrels of oil a day. And as we know, this is the dirtiest oil on earth. This is a bitumen that eats through pipes, that does a very special kind of damage when it spills, but even when it doesn't. And this is a point that I think we keep needing to remember. Even if the pipes work well and nothing spills, you're still dumping that bitumen somewhere around the world, and it will pollute somebody else's atmosphere. It's really important for us to say, well, it came through our territory. They built a pipe strong enough to take it, and I think we need to remember what it does, not only to the air and the land and the water if it spills, but what it does when it gets where it's going, so-called safely. But that's not good enough for the industry right now. They have planned over the next 5 years to spend $40 billion and build 14,000 kilometers of new pipelines in North America to take this bitumen around the world. And if they are successful in doing this, they'll add another 3 million barrels a day of bitumen being produced in the tar sands. And this is what we're fighting here. It's not an individual pipeline, although we must fight the Line 9, obviously, but it is a massive expansion of the most terrible energy product on Earth. James Hansen, the great NASA scientist, says if we allow this to happen, it's game over for the climate. And we had the great Bill McGibbon from 350.org out to join us on a couple of tour stops. I just had a tour of British Columbia and was at Victoria at the State House and was very moved by, as everyone was, by the power there. Bill McGibbon said to the people of British Columbia, you are here at a very special time on earth, because whatever you do here, if you're able to stop the pipelines, you do it for the whole world. It isn't just for you. And I've come away with that very deeply launched in my soul, if you will, and I think it's extraordinarily important for us to see the fight that we're now launching here in the eastern part of Canada. I know this isn't east-east, but the part where Line 9 starts, this is also a challenge that's been given to us, not only for our communities and for the communities to be directly affected, but for the whole world, because we have got to stop the growth of the tar sands. It's very important for us to see that the pipelines are the bloodlines. They're the arteries of the tar sands, and if we're not able to stop the arteries, we're not able to stop the dramatic increase in the tar sands. And it's very important to remember that it is the pipeline companies, the oil companies, that are then driving policy in Canada. We just give it over to them, because once those pipelines are built, there becomes this terrible automatic imperative to keep them filled at all times. What I got from my tour through British Columbia is that British Columbia, as you heard from so passionately from Art, is going to stop the pipelines, not just the Gateway, but the expansion of several other pipelines that they're fighting. I don't think they're going to get through the 132 First Nations communities who have said to them, you will not pass. They are not going to. And what the Canadian government is looking at is all eyes are now on the east. I'm not saying they've given up this fight, but it seems very clear if you tour and you see the passion with which the people in British Columbia are saying no, it's very clear that they have to have another strategy. And the strategy is twofold around the eastern part of Canada. Of course, it's also going south. One is the extension of the reversal of Line 9 and reopening the notion of the Trailblazer, which will go through the eastern townships through Vermont to a port in Portland, Maine, where it will be shipped either to other parts of the United States or around the world. And the first stage of this Line 9, by the way, will go through communities that have 9.1 million people in them. That's just the Canadian part of the Canadian arm. And it will travel through pristine wilderness, parks, lakes, rivers, and so on. But the other we should know about is that TransCanada is proposing a pipeline that will cost $5.6 billion. It's an East Coast pipeline that would take 625 barrels of tar sands bitumen every single day through Ontario, through Quebec, and through New Brunswick to be shipped overseas through St. John. Now the government, Canadian government and the industry are now saying, oh, it's only because we've just discovered that Eastern Canadians have been importing oil, and isn't that a terrible thing? And actually what we really want to do is be good Canadians, and we want to supply that oil to our Canadian sisters and brothers. Don't listen to that. This is an absolute lie. They're not going to make enough money supplying Western oil to Canadians east of Ontario. They're simply not. What they don't give a damn, and as Art says, and my stats, and we're going to check stats here, but is that more than 2/3 of the tar sands production is now in foreign hands, which doesn't mean that it would be fine if it were in Canadian hands, but we gave away complete control of our energy in the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that's one of the reasons that we fought it so hard at the time, is that it's much harder to have environmental assessments, much harder to convert to an alternative energy future if you have no control over these resources at all. This is all about allowing the growth of the tar sands, taking that bitumen and putting it through pipelines and sending it around the world. So the task that we have, I said this over and over, British Columbia, is not to have one pipeline fight, but to have pipeline fights, to have a coalition of pipeline activists and fights right across North America. And that means we have to support those people who are still sitting in a tree in Texas. Make very common cause with our sisters and brothers in New England, because they are deeply concerned. And if we allow this pipeline to continue to be built and the reversal to continue to be spread, it's going to be a fight that goes cross-border, and that's really important. When we look at this struggle, I just want to recognize that we do have some allies that have taken a different position. We're very close to communication, energy, and paper workers, and they are the workers affected, and we need to keep an open and a loving, I would say, dialogue with our sisters and brothers in CEP. When I got arrested a year ago, last September, on Parliament Hill, against these pipelines, particularly at that point the Keystone, I was hand in hand with Dave Coles, president of Communication, Energy, and Paper Workers on one hand, and Fred Wilson, who is a senior advisor to CEP on the other. But we need to keep this dialogue open. We also, of course, have our friends in the NDP who have taken a position supporting this Line 9 and this Canadian energy strategy. And I think it's very important for us to open a dialogue because I can't imagine that when the full force of what we're dealing with hits everybody, particularly in Quebec, I cannot imagine how that is going to be allowed to continue. And I want to say that I understand the position. It's based on what I would consider a dated analysis, that if we can just get control back, sovereign control back of our energy, that we can do something good with this. I think that what we've got to do, and I think the other issue we've got to address openly, is the fact that Atlantic Canada and Quebec are importing energy from places where there's great damage being done. And so it's not a question of exchanging one for the other, but really committing to an alternative energy future for all of us. Art spoke about it, but I do want to take a couple of minutes just to remind us what the Harper agenda is, because I think it is very clear. Stephen Harper has a plan for the country. His plan is to make it a superpower, and he wants to do that. He is doing that by allowing full and open exploitation of our energy and minerals and everything else. And I think water is on the table next. Literally, water is on the table next. And so what he is doing is removing any barrier and any tool that any of us have had to fight for even a kind of a just assessment, as Art talked about. There is the gutting of the scientists at Environment Canada, at Natural Resources, at Fisheries and Oceans, Parks Canada. Nobody's guarding our parks anymore. They are left untended. I mean, I have a list that thick of all the science centers and all the pure science research facilities that the Harper government has shut down. They don't like science, they don't like evidence, because evidence leads to proof, which leads to better law than when you're just making law on ideology. In fact, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans admits that it can do no serious analysis of the Gateway Pipeline because they don't have enough they can't fulfill their obligations because they don't have the inspectors. They're all off looking after to see which environmentalists are breaking the law in terms of now and then saying their views about something. And they've gutted the Fisheries Act, they've gutted the Environmental Assessment Process, they've gutted the Navigable Waters Act, they've put 32,000 lakes in jeopardy in this country. It means that pipelines can pass without any form of regulation, regulatory oversight whatsoever. And as fast as they can, they are negotiating trade agreements that give corporations all over the world enormous new powers. We're on the cusp of making a decision as to whether they're going to get CETA, the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, signed. It was supposed to be done 2 years ago, then it was supposed to be done a year ago, and we collectively have caused so much stress for them. So many municipalities, so many provinces, so many sectors have said no to this thing that they're now, Harper last week said, well, I'm casting a wide net on trade because, some of them are a little dicey. Yeah, this one's dicey because people know what's in it and they're beginning to be deeply concerned. One of the things that's in it is just like Chapter 11 of NAFTA, European corporations that get a hold of any sector, whether it's a public sector or a resource sector, once they have that hold, you can't change any rules. Similarly, they're negotiating or have negotiated this Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Act with China. Again, Chinese corporations, in this case, state-owned corporations by a superpower, will now have rights that supersede democratic rights of local governments across the country. Now, what this means, let me be real clear. In the absence of environmental laws and environmental standards and regulations, because they've been removed, any company that has this foreign investment background, whether it's the United States, China, or Europe, or many of the bilaterals, can come into our country if they put money into the minerals or energy sector, if they put money into a pipeline, and then a new government comes along in 3 years and says we're going to reinstate some of these environmental regulations that were destroyed, they can sue for compensation, and they can sue for big-time compensation for billions of dollars lasting into the future. And they even have the right to actually claim the actual water that they're using in the process of their operations. A company called Abitibi-Bowater, which is a big American pulp and paper company, was operating in Newfoundland. 4 years ago they went bankrupt. They left Newfoundland on their own. No one kicked them out. They left jobs, they left pensions, turned around and said to the government of Newfoundland, well, you owe us money for the water that we left behind. And the government of, it was Danny Williams who told them where they could put that little thought. So they went to the Boy Scout of Globalization, Stephen Harper, and they said, Stephen, we want, we're going to launch a Chapter 11 under NAFTA. And he said, don't bother. Here's $130 million for the water rights that you left behind. So now we have a government having set a precedent under these trade rules that actually say the actual resource itself, the actual piece of nature itself, has actually been so commodified that it belongs to a corporation from another country. And if you want to get it back, you have to pay the money. This is where it's going. We have handed over to these corporations the power to make decisions around our lives. And that's why we continue in my organization to say these trade agreements matter. And we need to build not only a pipeline movement that says, and we need to have this all along the Line 9 route, all along the Trans-Canada route. If they dare to come in and try to build a pipeline, we have to stand and say, you shall not pass. But we have to stand with one another and say, we'll stand with you when you say that you shall not pass. And I just want to end with the words. I was in Fort McMurray on the day a couple of weeks ago when the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations, that's their term, Wes, launched a challenge to a major expansion of the Shell refinery and Shell operation in the area. And we sat with them. It was really upsetting. We went to this environmental hearing, and just before we started, there were a lot of community people in the room, lots of First Nations from the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, and the clerk stood up and he said, I'd like to introduce you to, Dave over here and Bill, and these are our nice friendly police officers. And then and he named 2 other guys who were sheriffs. He said, they're going to be friendly, but if there's any trouble here, they know what to do. And I thought, I bet you never say that to a room full of suits from the energy company. I started the day off in a sour mood, but then we held a press conference, and one of the people launching this said the following, and I just wanted to end with this. He said, the oil companies have more money than we can ever dream of. They can outspend us at every turn, make more ads, and pay more experts. But we have the passion of our people, our culture, our treaty, the Canadian Constitution, and the truth, all on our side. And with the outpouring of support that is coming in from all corners of Canada and the US, we will confront big oil and protect our lands and our rights. We are not alone. Thank you.